Welcome back to Manhwa Heartbeats. Today, we'll be recapping a manhwa called The Maid No Longer Desires Her Master. Don't forget to subscribe, it helps us a lot. Enjoy. The young maid pleads with Miss Vesti to stop, but Miss Vesti hits her and cuts her hair, saying it looks better now. The maid apologizes and begs for forgiveness. Miss Vesti tells her that the floor is a mess and demands she clean it right away. She warns that she doesn't want to see a single strand of hair on the floor. The maid scrubs the floor and is told to make sure the wash basin has warm water next time, or she'll chop off all her hair. The maid leaves, relieved that it wasn't worse. Vesti, being the innkeeper's only daughter, always gets what she wants. The maid thinks to herself that she should get some rest since tomorrow will be busy. The next morning, the rooster crows. The maid has lived at the inn for most of her life. She was an orphan with no money, and Mr. Paul kindly took her in. However, he doesn't pay her for her work. Sometimes it's so tough that she wants to run away, but she knows that leaving might not lead to a better life. The maid greets a couple who arrives at the inn. The man says the inn is full because of the festival, and the woman replies that it's a good thing, because the food here is really tasty. The maid knows she has to be careful not to upset anyone. She thinks she should start preparing the food for the guests, so she heads to the kitchen. But as soon as she gets there, Vesti slaps her, and says her hair is messy. The maid apologizes, and Vesti says she got her hat dirty with her hands. The maid apologizes again, but Vesti complains that her face is dirty too, and it's making her lose her appetite. She tells the maid to wash her face right away, but the maid says the dirt won't come off. Vesti then warns her to hide, because she's heard that some strangers are asking for girls with silver hair. The maid is shocked and asks why Vesti would lie about that. Vesti says Eddie from the blacksmith told her, and it seems someone important is looking for a plaything. The maid thinks that even though Vesti is only 13, she knows a lot about the world. Girls in the slums have tough lives. If they are lucky, they become housemaids. If not, they end up as wenches, like everyone told the maid after her mother died. She doesn't feel very lucky now, because she has to stay at the inn for as long as she can. The maid walks into a shop and greets Josephine. Josephine calls her Lynn and asks if she wants the usual haunch of meat. The maid says yes, and Josephine asks if Mr. Paul still strikes her. The maid replies that it doesn't happen as much as it used to. Josephine says she knows they're not related, but she hates knowing how Mr. Paul treats her in private. She gives the maid the pork and says she put in a bit extra. She tells the maid to sneak in some bites when Mr. Paul isn't around. The maid thanks her and leaves. Josephine thinks to herself that Lynn looks just like her mother. She remembers how Lynn used to smile when her mother was alive, but she hasn't seen her smile since her mother passed away. Someone calls out to Lynn. She waves her hand and turns around, and it's Minos. He asks if she's out running errands. Lynn says she went out to get some ingredients. Minos complains that he hasn't seen her much since she started working at the inn. He hands her a kebab, but she says she has to get back home. Minos insists it will only take a few minutes, and jokes that he wishes someone would take the kebabs off his hands. Lynn takes the kebab and thanks him. Minos gives her another one, and she thanks him again, saying she'll treat him next time, but he refuses. Sometimes Lynn feels really down about her life, but something always comes up to give her hope. It's almost like a way of reassuring her that her mom would be worried. Minos tells Lynn that he's going to work as a valet for a noble family. Lynn asks if that means they won't see each other much. Minos says he won't be around often, because he'll be learning from the knights. He hopes she will hang out with him when he comes back and asks her to pinky promise. She agrees. Minos also tells Lynn it's best for her to keep a low profile for a few days. Lynn asks if he's talking about the people looking for a child with silver hair. Minos asks how she knew, and she says Vesti told her. He says it's better to be cautious and tells her to take care. Lynn thanks him. When Lynn gets home, she announces that she's back. Mr. Paul asks what took her so long and removes her scarf. He then asks the men standing in front of him if Lynn is the child they were looking for. The two men are surprised when they see Lynn's silver hair. One of them throws Mr. Paul some money, and Mr. Paul thanks him. Then he tells Lynn to go meet the men. She asks what he means, and Vesti tells her she has a new master now. Lynn begs Mr. Paul not to send her away. She promises to do the laundry twice a day, and says she won't ask for food. Mr. Paul tells her to let go of his hands. She keeps begging, but he tells her to get lost. Vesti reminds her that she said her silver hair would be her downfall, and warns her not to forget her when she ends up as the mistress of some ugly old noble. The men leave with Lynn. Lynn asks the men what they want her to do. They tell her to get into the carriage first, and they will take her to the castle. At the castle, a woman tells Lynn she looks like she's been through a lot and is too skinny. She says Lynn won't be able to serve Lady Elizabeth like this. The woman cleans Lynn up and gives her some food. Lynn thinks to herself that the food looks delicious. The woman warns her to eat slowly, or she might choke, and tells her that her job is to wait on Lady Elizabeth. Flashback to when Lynn was in the carriage with the men. They told her her job was to wait on Lady Elizabeth. Lynn asked how she would do that, and one of the men said she would be doing things in Lady Elizabeth's place. Things that Lady Elizabeth herself should not be doing. The woman introduces herself as Julie and tells Lynn that she can come to her anytime, if she needs a meal or a snack. Julie says she will find something for Lynn to eat. Lynn thanks her. Lynn thinks to herself that she's not really sure what she's supposed to be doing, but maybe life at the dukedom won't be so bad after all. They told her she'd have to wait on Lady Elizabeth, but it's been a week, and she still hasn't met her. Surprisingly, life at the estate is better than she expected, especially compared to the inn. A few more days pass, and finally, a man introduces her to Lady Elizabeth, and tells Lynn to introduce herself. Lynn says her name is Lynn, and that it's an honor to meet her. Lady Elizabeth asks her to take off her cap. When Lynn does, Lady Elizabeth comments on how she really does have silver hair, and tells her she's very pretty. She asks if Lynn said her name is Lynn, and says that Lynn must stay by her side at all times. Lady Elizabeth then says she'll see Lynn at her lesson. Lady Elizabeth tells the man, Marvin, that is amazing. He thanks her, and she says he was right about Lynn having silver hair, just like Princess Raina. She thinks things are going to be interesting. The governess then asks Lady Elizabeth if she finished her history homework from last week. Lady Elizabeth says she did, but the governess notes that she made the same mistake as before and will have to punish her again. The governess then flogs Lynn. Lynn sits by a tree, thinking that she thought her job was just to keep Lady Elizabeth company. The teacher said she would grade the homework next week, so Lynn's job turns out to be taking punishment for Lady Elizabeth. Since the governess isn't allowed to punish a noble lady, they needed someone else to take her place. Lady Elizabeth seemed to enjoy it when Lynn took a beating. It's not the job Lynn expected, but it's still better than working at the inn. Even though it's hard and painful, she hopes that by taking the beatings, she can make Lady Elizabeth happy. As Lynn sits by a tree, trying to recover, she blinks and notices a young man standing in front of her. The man asks her who she is. Our female lead wonders who he might be since she can barely see him because of the bright sunlight. The man tells her that there's blood on her face, and that she's sitting in his secret spot. He didn't expect anyone to be resting there. This is where Lynn meets a boy so incredibly handsome, that it feels like even the god of beauty would be jealous, just by looking at him. This is the first time she encounters Master Martin, the heir to the Dukedom of Ereuputh. Our protagonist starts feeling a fluttery sensation in her stomach, almost like butterflies. She's not sure what's happening to her, and then someone calls her name. She answers and starts running, her heart beating fast and feeling like something is wrong with it. She finds Lady Elizabeth and asks if she was looking for her. Lady Elizabeth snaps at her, asking how many times she called her. Lynn apologizes, but Lady Elizabeth slaps her and asks if her head is in the clouds. Lynn apologizes again. Lynn has been serving Lady Elizabeth for about a month now. From what she's seen so far, Lady Elizabeth has severe mood swings. She's even more temperamental than Vesti. Sometimes Lady Elizabeth is in a bad mood for an entire day, and on those days, all Lynn can do is beg for forgiveness. Lynn apologizes to Lady Elizabeth again, but the lady just calls her a dumb twat. Lynn remembers that she has homework from Governess Luther that's due this week, and asks what she needs to write about. Lady Elizabeth says it's about studying the founding flag of the Trona Empire. Our girl asks why she needs to know about some silly flag. Lady Elizabeth tells her to go to the library and get some books. Lynn asks what kind of books she should bring. Lady Elizabeth, sounding annoyed, asks what's wrong with her and says she's supposed to bring history books. Lynn replies that she'll be right back. Lady Elizabeth was kind enough to teach Lynn how to read and write. At first, Lynn was very grateful, but now she understands that there was a reason Lady Elizabeth wanted her to be literate. The more Lynn studied, the more homework Lady Elizabeth gave her. Lynn finds these assignments much better than getting beaten by Governess Luther for mistakes on her homework. The assignments also give Lynn a chance to visit the Grand Library, which has so many books. Lynn searches for the history books in the Duke of Ereuputh's library, which holds almost every book published in the Empire. She thinks that if she ever gets a day off, she would love to spend it there, reading all day long. As she looks through the books, she wonders if the ones she has will be enough. She tries to take another book, when she hears a voice and almost falls off the ladder. Lord Martin catches her just in time. Lord Martin apologizes for scaring her, and says he didn't mean to. Lynn thanks him, feeling like her heart is about to burst. He asks if she is doing research on the founding flag of Trona. Lynn says yes, and explains that Lady Elizabeth asked her to get some books. Lord Martin wonders if Lady Elizabeth can't find the books herself, and says that finding the right books is part of the homework, and that Lynn is a terrible student. Lynn begs Lord Martin to pretend he didn't see her in the library. He tells her that the 3 books she has won't be enough, because Governess Luther is hard to please. Lynn agrees and asks what she should do. Lord Martin offers to help her, saying he has studied the topic before. Lynn is grateful and thanks him, but while they are talking, Lord Martin removes her cap. Lord Martin asks Lynn to take off her cap. He says her hair is very pretty and asks if people don't tell her that. Lynn replies that no one has ever told her that before. As a commoner with hair the color of a royal, people just point and gossip behind her back. Lord Martin tells her she doesn't have to remove her cap if it makes her uncomfortable. Lynn says she will do it. Lord Martin thinks to himself that Lynn is cuter than he expected. He asks her why she hides her beautiful hair under a cap, and then gives her some books to use as references for her assignment. Lynn thanks him, and Lord Martin says he looks forward to seeing her hair again. Lord Martin wonders if Lynn is the new girl that Lady Elizabeth brought in. He notices she has scars all over her face and body, which seems too harsh even for Lady Elizabeth. He hopes he gets to see her again. Meanwhile, Governess Luther asks Lady Elizabeth once more and hopes she will tell the truth this time. She asks if Lady Elizabeth was the one who did her homework. The work is much better than she expected from her, and she can tell that someone else helped her. Governess Luther says she will let this issue go one last time, but if she finds out that Lady Elizabeth received help again, she will have to talk to her father. Lady Elizabeth insists that she wrote the essay herself and asks if Governess Luther is accusing her of lying. Governess Luther explains that the essay is much better written than any of her previous assignments. Lady Elizabeth is offended and says that as the daughter of the Duke of Ereuputh, she is fully capable of writing a well-done essay. She questions how Governess Luther can suggest she'd need help and dares her to say she'll go to her father. Governess Luther thinks to herself that she should stop there. If she continues, Lynn won't be able to survive. Governess Luther says she understands and won't press the issue further. Lady Elizabeth then walks over to Lynn and slaps her, saying it's Lynn's fault for everything and that she deserves to be punished. She keeps hitting Lynn until she's told that it's enough. Lady Elizabeth asks what they mean by enough. The governess says the essay was too advanced for Lynn's level, and that she's disappointed with her performance. She hopes Lynn won't disappoint her again with future assignments, and says she'll be more careful. Governess Luther says the lesson is over for today. Lady Elizabeth says she understands, and will see Lynn next time. She then tells Lynn to get out of her sight, and leaves the room. Governess Luther asks Lynn if she can get up. Another maid comes over and helps Lynn to her feet, seeing how hurt she is. She asks Lynn why Lady Elizabeth seems to hate her so much. The maid doesn't understand why Lady Elizabeth treats Lynn this way. The situation between Governess Luther and Lady Elizabeth only gets worse, and the punishments become more severe. Lynn feels increasingly sad and frightened. There's only one place that gives her a bit of comfort, and that's the lake behind the estate. Our girl hurries to the lake, feeling she needs to get there as quickly as possible. It's the only place where she feels she can wash away some of her sadness. The lake is said to have been loved by the former Duchess of Ereuputh, and it brings Lynn a bit of peace, too. Unfortunately, no one visits the lake anymore, which makes Lynn even more upset. She had hoped to make Lady Elizabeth like her, but it seems like that will never happen. Lady Elizabeth keeps beating her, and saying that Lynn looks like someone she despises. Lynn doesn't know who Lady Elizabeth is talking about. She figures she must look like someone the lady hates, and that's why she's treated so badly. Thinking about it doesn't change anything, and Lynn feels like she'll be stuck living like this forever. When she first arrived at the dukedom, she had hoped for a better life. Now, she finds herself saying she hates everything about it. As Lynn sits by the lake, she hears a voice ask her what she hates. She looks around, unsure of who is speaking. The voice tells her to look up, and she sees it's Lord Martin. He says it's been a while since they last spoke and jumps down to where she is. Lynn greets him, feeling a mix of relief and surprise. Lord Martin notices that Lynn's face is red and swollen. He asks what happened and if someone hit her. Lynn says it's not that, but Lord Martin wonders if it was Lady Elizabeth. Lynn insists that it's not the case. Lord Martin offers to go and ask Lady Elizabeth about it, but Lynn pleads with him not to. She explains that if he asks Lady Elizabeth, she'll get into even more trouble. Lord Martin says that Lynn should just nod her head for yes and shake her head for no. When he asks if Lady Elizabeth was involved, Lynn nods her head. Lord Martin looks concerned and asks when Lynn will learn to avoid getting into trouble. Lynn begs him not to mention anything to Lady Elizabeth, or she'll be in even deeper trouble. Lord Martin asks if she will really end up in worse trouble. Lynn thinks to herself that she can't tell Lord Martin the whole truth, especially since Lady Elizabeth is his younger sister. Lord Martin then gives Lynn a small package, and tells her to try whatever is inside. Lynn thanks him, but Lord Martin asks how she can thank him when she doesn't even know what he has given her. Lynn apologizes for not knowing what to say. Lord Martin chuckles and says he's just joking. He tells her that, just between the two of them, he will try to bring her something nice whenever he can. Lynn feels her heart flutter at the kind gesture from Lord Martin, the most beautiful boy she has ever met. Until now, violence was the only form of human contact she had ever known. Pain and fear were a part of her daily life. Lord Martin is the first person to show her kindness since her mother passed away. Her heart starts beating faster again. Lord Martin notices that Lynn's face looks flushed and asks if she is feeling ill. He asks if she has a fever. Lynn assures him that she's fine and doesn't have a fever. Lord Martin says he's glad to hear that. He then puts something in her mouth. Lynn asks what it is, and he tells her it's chocolate, and that it's delicious. He asks her if she thinks it's delicious. Our girl has never tasted something so sweet and delightful before. She tells him it's wonderful, and Lord Martin says he's glad she enjoyed it. He then gently pats her on the head. Lynn isn't sure if her heart is racing because of the sweet chocolate, or because of Lord Martin's beautiful smile. He tells her she should get going since she has been out for quite a while. She takes her leave, thinking she might get beaten for being late, but it doesn't matter. She's happy to have spent some time with him. He mentions that it's a shame he won't be able to see her much longer. Lynn checks and sees that Lady Elizabeth is still in bed. That was close. It's her job to make sure Lady Elizabeth wakes up in a good mood. If not, Lady Elizabeth might throw anything she can find at Lynn. Lady Elizabeth asks for water, and Lynn quickly brings it to her. The lady then questions where Lynn has been. She says she thought Lynn would follow her right away, and that she was very uncomfortable without her. Lynn thinks to herself that this is not true since there are many other servants who can serve Lady Elizabeth. She saw Muriel follow the lady earlier and go to the back garden, but she knows better than to argue, so she apologizes. Lady Elizabeth asks Lynn where she went. Lynn replies that she went to the kitchen. Lady Elizabeth wants to know why, and Lynn explains that she told them to prepare refreshments for her. The lady then asks if Lynn thinks she's a pig. Lynn tries to clarify that she knows Lady Elizabeth likes to enjoy cannolis after her nap. Lady Elizabeth tells Lynn to fetch some cannolis for her. Lynn goes to Julie and asks if she's there for Lady Elizabeth's refreshments. Julie confirms and asks if Lynn wants the cannolis she requested earlier. Lynn says yes. Julie says she knew Lynn would stop by at this time, and hands her one cannoli for the lady and one for herself. Lynn tries to refuse the one meant for herself, but Julie insists, saying it can't be served because it's not the right shape, so Lynn should go ahead and have it. Lynn thanks her. Julie mentions that she heard from Muriel that Lady Elizabeth hit Lynn again, and wonders when Lynn will learn to control her temper. Lynn says it wasn't too bad today. Julie advises Lynn to leave before the lady gets angry with her again and heads off. Julie thinks to herself that Lynn is such a good girl and works so hard, so she doesn't understand why Lady Elizabeth treats her so poorly. Another maid asks Lynn if she will be all right, and suggests that she should go with her. Lynn replies that Lady Elizabeth told her to go alone. The maid warns her that there are wild animals in the forest and advises her not to spend too much time picking the berries. Lynn says she won't and thanks the maid. Lynn is heading out to the forest at this late hour, because Lady Elizabeth said a visitor is coming soon who loves wild strawberries. Lady Elizabeth mentioned that Lord Philip will be arriving soon and asked Lynn to pick some strawberries for him. Normally, they are supposed to work in pairs for tasks like this, but Lynn is confident she'll be fine if she works quickly. She hopes she might run into Lord Martin again, but then remembers he will be leaving for the academy soon, so she won't see him as much. As Lynn picks the berries, she hears noises in the bushes and wonders if something is there. She remembers Muriel's warning about the wild animals and worries she might be in trouble. Suddenly, she sees something and screams for help. A carriage stops nearby, and the young master steps out to see what's going on. The driver apologizes, saying he heard the scream in the woods and it scared the horse. The young master then comes down to check on Lynn. The young master asks Lynn if she stopped because of a scream. The driver says it was a short scream, but sounded like someone was in trouble. The young master then asks if they are close to the dukedom, noting that there shouldn't be any dangerous wild animals around here. Lynn spots a deer and feels relieved. She packs the strawberries into her basket and starts heading back. Julie is happy when Lynn returns with a full basket of wild strawberries. She praises Lynn for doing a good job and tells her to rest. Lynn replies that she needs to see the lady before going to bed. Julie asks how the lady could send her out alone in the middle of the night. Just then, another maid comes in and tells Lynn that the guest has arrived. The maid says Lady Elizabeth wants all of them, and that Lynn should hurry up and change her clothes. The guards announce the arrival of Lord Hargreaves. He walks in and greets everyone, saying it's been a while. Philip is the successor to Count Hargreaves. Lord Martin says it has indeed been a long time, and then Lady Elizabeth rushes over to him. Lady Elizabeth asks Lord Hargreaves what took him so long and tells him she missed him a lot. Philip thanks her for the warm welcome. Lady Elizabeth says they should go to the sitting room. One of the maids whispers to Lynn that she can see why Lady Elizabeth likes Philip so much. He is very different from Lord Martin. Lynn agrees. Lord Martin has a dark aura with his raven hair and ash-grey eyes, while Lord Philip is bright and refreshing like a spring forest. Lord Martin comments that the trip must have been long, but Philip says not to worry. He came in high spirits, excited to reunite with his old friend. Lady Elizabeth then asks how Philip could say that, and if he didn't miss her at all. Philip replies that he was also looking forward to seeing Martin's beautiful younger sister. Lady Elizabeth is delighted by his words and says it makes her happy to hear them. The maids think to themselves that Lady Elizabeth never laughs like that in front of them. Philip notices Lynn and asks if she is a new servant with the silver hair. Lynn thinks that everyone in the estate is used to her hair, but she forgets that others might find it unique. Philip says he feels like he's seen her face before. Lady Elizabeth gets upset and asks if Philip is more interested in a servant girl. They haven't seen each other in ages. Philip assures her that he would never think that. He says she comes first and gently pats her head. Lady Elizabeth laughs and says he almost made her cry. The servants around them also look relieved. Philip mentions that he finds the forest around the estate beautiful. Lady Elizabeth asks if they'd like to go on a picnic there tomorrow. Martin objects, saying that Philip just arrived and must be tired. Philip says it's fine and he'd like to go. Lady Elizabeth says she'll have the kitchen prepare a basket for them. They'll go by horse. Martin asks how far she wants to go, and Lady Elizabeth replies that the deeper parts of the forest are the most beautiful. She asks the servants to check the area and tells Lynn that she must show them the way. Lynn reluctantly agrees. Lady Elizabeth says she'll start the preparations, and they'll leave at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Muriel apologizes to Lynn, saying she should be going with her. Lynn tells her not to worry, explaining that Lady Elizabeth refused to bring her along. Muriel doesn't understand why Lady Elizabeth is so hard on Lynn and notes that the basket is too heavy for one person to carry. Lynn guesses that Lady Elizabeth might not want to bring two servants with her. Muriel thanks Lynn for her hard work and says she will handle the laundry for today. Lynn says Muriel should be thanked and mentions they must be waiting for her, so she should hurry. Muriel tells Lynn to take care. Lady Elizabeth comments that it's a beautiful day, and she's glad it didn't rain. Philip asks if she's ready. Lady Elizabeth says he and Martin look as dashing as ever, and Philip thanks her, saying she looks lovely too. Meanwhile, Lynn is struggling with the heavy basket. Philip notices and offers to help. Lynn says it's fine, but then she trips and almost falls. Philip asks if she's alright or hurt. Lynn says she's fine. Lady Elizabeth sees them and thanks Philip for his help, hoping it won't make the lady angry. Philip says he never knew there was such a nice spot in the woods. He asks if they can set up their picnic here, and Martin agrees. Lynn wonders what she should do, since she has never been on a horse before. Philip walks over to Lynn and offers his hand, noticing that she seems inexperienced with horses, and might get hurt trying to get off on her own. Lynn glances at Lady Elizabeth and asks if she can be excused. Philip helps her down, and she thinks to herself that Lady Elizabeth is as upset as she expected. She worries about what will happen when they return to the estate. Philip mentions that there's a lot of food and invites Lynn to join them. Lynn is surprised and says she's fine where she is. Philip insists he doesn't like her sitting alone by herself, and Lady Elizabeth agrees, telling Lynn to come and pour some tea. Lynn kneels down to serve her. Martin tells Lynn she doesn't have to kneel, and that she should get comfortable since they are the only ones there. Lady Elizabeth agrees and tells Lynn to have a seat. Lynn thinks to herself that it's so nice here, and she knows this moment is fleeting, so she'll enjoy it while she can. Philip asks Martin if he will be at the academy in a few months and if he's ready for it. Martin just shrugs and says he doesn't see much to prepare for. Philip then asks if Martin will be joining a fraternity at the academy. Martin explains that it's not something he can choose, it just happens. Lady Elizabeth hears this and says she will be lonely with both Martin and Philip away at the academy. Philip tries to comfort her by saying they will come back during school breaks, and Lady Elizabeth insists he must visit her when he does. Lynn takes this opportunity to ask Lady Elizabeth if she can wander around a bit. Lady Elizabeth agrees, giving Lynn some freedom for a while. Lynn walks behind a tree and starts thinking about Lord Martin leaving for the academy. The Imperial Academy of Trona also serves as a military school, and only boys are accepted, so Martin will be the only one going. Lynn feels that her days at the estate are long and tiring, and without Martin's presence, she has no one to turn to. Seeing him was like a small reward, a bit of light in her otherwise dreary life. His presence gave her the motivation she needed to keep going. She sits by the creek and dips her legs into the cool water, telling herself she needs to snap out of her gloomy thoughts. While she is by the creek, Lynn spots some wild strawberries. She remembers Lady Elizabeth asking her to pick strawberries before Philip arrived, so she starts gathering them. Lynn hopes that the strawberries will make Lady Elizabeth happy. Just then, she hears Lady Elizabeth calling her name. Lady Elizabeth sounds frustrated and asks why Lynn wasn't answering her calls. She demands to know if Lynn is trying her patience. Lynn quickly apologizes, trying to explain that she was busy picking strawberries. Lady Elizabeth, clearly annoyed, tells Lynn that she should have waited until they got back to the estate. As she moves to walk away, Lady Elizabeth trips and almost falls. In the process, she ends up shoving Lynn into the water. Lynn, dripping wet, comments that she's glad Lady Elizabeth didn't fall into the water herself. Lady Elizabeth, now even more irate, blames Lynn for causing the accident and says it's Lynn's fault for being clumsy. She warns Lynn that if it takes another beating to make her understand, so be it. Just then, Philip runs up, concerned and asking what's going on. He heard shouting and wants to know what happened. Lady Elizabeth tries to look innocent and pretends that she was only trying to help Lynn, even though it's clear she's the one who caused the trouble. If you're eager for the next chapter, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe and ensure to hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time.